Welcome back to another episode of the Easy Button Investor Podcast with myself, Cole Ruud-Johnson, and Tucker Merrihew. Tucker, how you doing today?
Fantastic. Glad to be back on the mic. We took a little break, but we're back at it.
Yeah, I was jaunting around the world and very happy to be home. Even when I travel like that, and I do work when I travel a lot, at least most of the time, it's usually like day 4 or day 5, no matter where I am on the world, in the world, where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to wake up and go to the office. So glad to be back. But today, you guys, we have a great show for you. We're talking about something we've touched on in shows, but haven't made a full episode about, and that is who do you need to hire? I think the world of real estate and bigger is sexier has painted a picture that you guys all have to have offices full of massive teams. I thought that was the case, and I filled an office full of a massive team. And it can put you in a bad spot. Not only that, but people are often surprised that it can be a lot simpler than you think. And I think Tucker and I have not distinct opinions on this, but I think I've spent most of my career in like the volume wholesale deal side of the business, and he's done that, but he's also done the lean, profitable development flipping side too. So I think we'll have some good banter and some good input for you guys as you guys make decisions this year around what kind of team you want to build. So I think a good point to kick off here, Tucker, is if you want to run through the teams you have built and the different variations of the teams and your thoughts around people that you've done to date.
Sure. And I'll kind of like break it up into 4 buckets, right? And, one of the buckets you're probably more of an expert in than I am. But just for our audience in terms of like, what kind of business are you running and which version of team building probably applies best to your business, right? Or at least at the current time. So as far as I see it, you've got, your wholesale business, right? That's kind of the beginning of your real estate career. Whatever that business looks like, however big you want it to be, the necessary team members you need there. Then of course, a lot of people kind of graduate to rehabber. They start rehabbing a few houses, which, natural progression. And then some people continue on to new construction. And then some people even continue on beyond that to some type of development, whether it be, ground up multifamily, self-storage, whatever it is, right? And so, the core skill sets that you kind of build in the wholesaler bucket, as you're first starting out, or basically just trying to find undervalued off-market properties. A lot of the team members or lack thereof, depending on how big your team is, that you have in that bucket as you're kind of creating those skills and mastering those skills that you then take forward with you, you can bring those team members forward to kind of help fill the other buckets also, right? So hopefully that makes sense to everybody in the audience. And so for me, I wasn't fully in the wholesaler bucket ever. I was always looking to buy and improve and sell, so basically renovate to start with. And so, that's where I really started, but I also had to figure out how in the world do we find properties to buy that we can put money into, sell it, and make a good amount of money. And so that, required that I learn a lot of the wholesaler skills that I'll let you kind of dive into and kind of what that team looks like. But, when I first really started going into rehabbing and doing a number of rehab projects, my team was pretty small. And as you mentioned, like there's a lot of mantra out there about how like I've got 20 people on my team and I've got a 30-person sales floor and I got all these things. And it's like, I don't want any of that at this point in my career. Now, obviously, when you're younger, you've got different ideas of what you want. And then you kind of, do a lot of those ideas and you figure out what you don't want, right? And of course, you figure out what you do. So for me, when I started out, really just trying to find off-market properties to then be able to rehab and sell, the most important component is obviously finding them, right? And so for that, it was really a 2-person team. For a while, it was myself and Chris, my office manager and marketing manager. And basically, he handled the phones, he handled all the lead intake, he handled all the follow-up. I handled all of the kind of orchestrating of the marketing campaigns that went out. And then, of course, I handled, coming up with whatever it is we were going to offer, strategies on that. He would do the presentation. We would both go do property visits to kind of see if it was a good fit for what we're looking at. But then on the other side of it, you've got the construction end, right? So like I was kind of had my foot in both ponds, we'll call it. So I was kind of in the wholesaler end where you're trying to find these undervalued good properties that we can renovate. But then I would also spend some of my time out in the field at the construction site since I had the general contractor's license as well. And so I had, a project manager that I had hired, and that project manager essentially ran the rehab projects. And then I had a couple of in between labor guys that I carried as well that he kind of managed. So it was really a combination of 2 to 3 people on the construction side that worked for my company. And then on the acquisition side, it was myself and Chris. So it was about a 5 to 6 person operation that I would say I was responsible for day in and day out. The rest of it were all service providers, subcontractors, outside people that I didn't have to make sure were taken care of within the walls of my company every day.
Yeah, I think, in this business, I feel like how many people you can hire and how many deals you can do and how much revenue you can produce is it's like the real estate investor's version of virtue signaling of like, look how successful I am, but don't look under the hood and see how much money I'm making, what my life looks like. And am I addicted to a substance to get myself to sleep at night, whatever it may be. So I think that's the pattern that I fell into. It's funny. So many of the guys, and this week, Doug, I don't know if you saw it. I'm not going to call him out by name here, but are you
talking about the lawsuit that hit the interweb? I saw that.
The guy that dyes his hair different colors lawsuit, the NFT class action. Yeah. So again, I think the reality is that the people that are screaming at you to do different things and that they have the right answer, the loudest people oftentimes I feel like are just the ones that are trying to convince themselves that they made the right decision. But for you guys out there, we had the conversation around what kind of team you have to build. I think the first thing you have to look at and go back to is the type of business you're trying to build. And if you want to make a lot of profit, it's very hard to do that in this business if you overstaff, no matter what you do. If you're flipping houses, developing, if you're doing wholesaling, once you get too many hands in the pot, you just become a slave to the machine. And no matter how many deals you do, it's very unlikely you make as much money at the end of the year that you actually think you did. And I found that to be true. Like anytime I see someone with 3 partners in this business, and it's all the time, they get a guy that's focused on sales, a guy that's focused on operations, and oftentimes a guy those 2 guys just look up to as a third partner. And you get 3 partners in a real estate business. It's not like Silicon Valley where you're going to sell for $2 billion. There's not enough to go around. And partnerships are part of the team. But I think the first place to start is what kind of business are you trying to build? Because if you can't answer that question, and if you want to run like I did, I ran a $3 million a year wholesale business that paid me $7,000 a month one year. And that's still cool to be self-employed, but none of you guys want that business. That is not a business that anyone should strive for. And then I've ran $1.5 million a year wholesale business that's paid me $400,000 in a year. And that was a much better business. Yeah, did I do a little more work? But that's part of the issue I wanted to address is you guys are chasing this version of reality where you don't have any work to do. And that doesn't exist. You don't want it to exist because things will go stale very quickly in your company. To me, unless you are a business whiz that just wants to run a massive business because that's always been your dream, most people would be happy somewhere in I actually watched a podcast on this yesterday. People are the happiest when their team is between 4 and 12 people combined, overseas and stateside. You do between 1 and 4 million a year. Your team is 4 to 12 people, and you have a 50% margin on every dollar that comes in. Like that is what the guy called, because he does a lot of research on small businesses. That is what he called like the sweet spot financially for small businesses. And I do agree. And on the off-market side, that means you can do a lot with 1 or 2 salespeople. You don't need 10 of them. You can do a ton with 1 or 2 salespeople, someone to handle your paperwork, like a transaction coordinator, you pay part-time, and then you directing a lot of the ships, you working with buyers, you handling operations. So you don't have to fill every seat on the bus to make a lot of money. But I think that was a fascinating stat. And it really took me back because it's, I think still I battle internally of the overstaffing thing and not realizing how, and again, it's also the great people versus good people, right? One amazing salesperson for you guys listening to this is going to produce just as much as 3 mediocre salespeople. That's also a part of the equation.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, that was really why I only had 1 salesperson ever, because he was really, really good. Right. And I could have hired other younger guys that, were trying to get into the business and learn it, but they would have been like a quarter as good as he was. And, so it was like, okay, I'll just retain him. I'll make sure he's taken care of well. I don't have to hire anybody else. I don't have to manage anybody else. I don't have to train anybody else. And so just kept it a very simple business. But I did that on purpose too. But, of course, there was a lot of differing opinions that were out there in our space. Remember, whole scaling was like this huge word, right? Yeah. And most of those dipshits are done and gone at this point. But, that was kind of the mantra, and the push was like, bigger is always better, right? And on all levels. And it's just not true. But, at the end of the day, if you're going to run a wholesaling business, you can probably have the smallest team of people that you're responsible for of any of the businesses. You definitely shouldn't have the biggest. And then as you kind of grow into the other parts of the business where you're keeping some of the projects that you source, then you have to grow it to some extent. And I've done that bigger over time, and now I've dialed it back again because, again, I kind of figured out the same thing, right? Like the more people, more problems, right? And not everybody's an all-star that you're going to hire. I mean, they might have a good personal rep, initially when you go to the interview, and then, they show up for the first month or two, but eventually they got problems, and, they got money problems, they got drug problems, they got personal problems, they got all kinds of shit that you got to deal with. And then that becomes a bit of a cancer within your organization. And the bigger your organizations, you're always going to have that. But when you're in a real estate business, you could run it small enough that you can, try and keep those things out of it as much as possible. Bigger companies, it's virtually impossible to do that.
We hired a guy, I think 2 years ago for Easy Button. And again, I've had plenty of hiring whiffs, just getting older, and I feel like I have a better gut on it now. But it was probably 2 years ago, and we hired this guy to help with on the CS side of our business. And Tucker had a booth for us at the BPCon, and he texts me and goes, "This guy just showed up in like bright red jeans. I don't think it's going to work out." And it didn't work out, but it's funny when you hire enough people, the smallest things kind of are the tell of like if it's going to work or not. But that's a funny one. So one of the things I read through, and I think this will lead us into the conversation about what positions should people hire for? Like, what are the common ones that actually work that you should strive to have in this business? Before we get there, I read through this. There's a Y Combinator blurb on Twitter the other day. And if you guys don't know what Y Combinator is, they take in a bunch of applicants for newer entrepreneurs. They kind of train them on entrepreneurship, help them get funding for their idea. And they've gone, they're Silicon Valley based, and they've gone from this idea of hire as many people as you can as soon as possible, show as much revenue as you can. Who cares about your profit and loss? Just show revenue, show team, show massive growth. And now their whole thing is like, what's the least amount of people that you can hire to get your startup to where it needs to go? That's how they train their people now. And there's companies doing $100 million in annual recurring revenue that have been part of Y Combinator that have like a team of 4 to 8 people. And I think for a lot of you guys listening, that's how I think about business now. It's how the real flex is how big you can build your business by maximizing the team you already have in your profit margin. But I thought that was a cool blurb. But I want to move on to, if Tucker, someone asked you, what are the 3 to 5 positions, whether you're wholesaling, developing, flipping, if you're going to go source your own deals and run an operation, let's say you can take a week off here and there, to you, what are the 3 to 5 positions, if there's that many, that you think people should be hiring that is worth the money to get right?
I think the first one is obviously you, right? If you're gonna be starting a wholesale business, off-market acquisition business, right? That ends up being whatever it is, but you've got to have somebody that understands marketing, right? And it's going to be very difficult to hire a salesperson and have them understand marketing. They're going to understand sales, but not marketing. So you're kind of the most important first, the kingpin, so to speak, right? Like you got to understand why you're using certain marketing channels, what you're targeting, why you're using this data, why you're targeting this area, types of properties, things like that, right? And then once you figure that out, you can then kind of direct the rest of the team as you hire. And I think the next most logical hire for me is somebody that, is there to answer the phone when it rings, call leads back, kind of be the before experience, and partly during experience for the customers, the people that call to say, I might want to be interested in selling your house or their house, right? And so that way you're not, because at a certain point, like if you're just sending marketing to your cell phone and you're doing all the callbacks, you can do that to a certain point. But eventually, you're going to get spread too thin to do that effectively, even if you're a great salesperson. And so as you kind of build your business, I think that's the first hire, if you're in the acquisition side of the business. But I'd be curious what you think.
Yeah, I think if you're going to be doing direct to seller acquisitions, I've kind of built a framework that I talk about a lot on my socials. And I think you can build on $1 million a year revenue acquisition business, right? And when I talk about revenue, it's different if you're flipping, if you're developing, right? Let's say $1 million a year wholesale business, you're typically doing about 30 deals a year. So if you're flipping, let's say it's half that. If you're developing, it could be a third of that or less to actually take home between 500 grand and $1 million a year. But nonetheless, if you want to source 10, 20, 30 deals a year for whatever kind of operation you're running, I think you only need five hires for every, call it 20 to 30 deals a year you want to source. I think one thing is investors are the worst people, I believe, at like understanding what kind of work is valuable. And I make fun of like realtors all the time on my Instagram for their daily schedule of like waking up, going to a sales meeting, emailing 3 clients and going to Jazzercise and being like, oh, I had a great day today.
Do they still have Jazzercise?
Yeah, my mom still does Jazzercise.
Oh,
so
okay. I thought that went away in the like late 80s, but
no,
I
they
guess
still
not.
got it, man. They still got
okay.
it.
Glad to hear it.
And made it through. So yeah, I think everyone should have a really, really good admin assistant of some kind. You don't have to call it that, but someone that just can help you out with the things that investors suck at, like pulling lists, like keeping your KPIs dialed in, like keeping your CRM organized, your notes on your leads dialed in. You don't need someone if you're doing 200 grand a year or $1 million a year in your business. You don't need someone to book your travel for you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about someone to just make sure the things that you're naturally going to suck at, probably if you run a business, because we like to move fast, make sure they're being picked up behind you. And
I will say this though, before you keep going, because I think it's an important point, because a lot of people will hire that person and they won't actually know what the hell they're doing themselves, and then expect them to just like magically do it correctly.
Very good point. Yeah, I call that abdication. So I think abdication is you hire someone, you sit on one Zoom call with them, tell them everything you want them to do, cross your fingers, and then yell at them when they don't do it. Delegation is you document what you want done very clearly. You define an end state of success, like what success looks like for them, and then you meet with them once a week and coach them against that. And to me, I'm really big on when we hire, like we brought on 3 people this week: a media manager, a new salesperson, and a new part of our coaching team. And for our team that's been onboarded them, what I'd say is just give them a digestible meal. Give them one thing they can crush for the first couple of weeks so they feel confident, they get used to who's in the organization before we pile on. And I think a lot of you guys out there can benefit from that, even if it's someone to take over your CRM cleanup and your KPI tracking. Give them one thing that's very clear on how they win and then build on that. But people are not magicians. And usually if a hire fails or you have 4 hires fail in a row, it's a you issue, not a them issue. That's a great point. And that exists for every person you hire, not just that hire. And then you have what I call the fulfillment piece, which is you need someone, if you're going to do 20, 30 deals a year, to take care of a lot of the paperwork, to take care of scheduling showings, if you're wholesaling for buyers, if it's for your team, for contractors, to do the paperwork, to talk to tenants, to make sure liens are taken care of, and just focused on that. People are oftentimes shocked. You can go hire a retired escrow officer or a mortgage broker or a real estate agent and pay them $400 per file, and they'll handle all of that and do it very well. I've had the best success with that person being a woman. That's just, they're detail oriented and they're patient and they're kind, and it's been great. That's been the best fit for that role. But you can get that done for a lot less than you think. You do 20 deals in a year, you're paying out whatever it is, $8,000 that whole year for that person, $10,000 that whole year for that person. And then marketing. And to Tucker's point, you need to have, if you don't have a leads problem, you don't have a problem. What I mean by that is if you aren't overwhelmed with leads, that's the problem you should be solving. And a lot of you guys go try to build a sales team or go try to build this big fancy operation, but you don't even have 10 leads a day coming in. It's impossible. And if you want to source 30 deals a year, let's call it 3 deals a month to be safe. You need about 10 leads per day per 3 deals per month you want to source. That's what I've found to be directionally accurate. And it can change depending on where you're spending your marketing dollars. So you need someone or a company like us, it doesn't have to be us, to make sure those leads are coming in every single day. And then you build your sales team. And to me, you only need call it 3 deals a month you want to source, you only need one really good salesperson. And that's the answer. I like having someone to triage the leads and kind of like a fluffer. We call them a lead manager. So that's a great hire. But even if you just have one really good salesperson that you pay very well, don't go hire a kid out of a frat and like I did and pay him 10% and expect him to succeed. Go find someone that's really good and pay them 25% of each deal they find, and they will crush it. And to me, that what I just laid out is like, if you did that per every 30 deals you want to source, and you guys listening to this, especially if you're flipping and developing, that's all you ever need. You don't need to source more than 20, 25 deals a year if you're doing them yourself. Oftentimes much less than that. That to me is like the perfect stack to, you have, again, that's like TC part-time, admin full-time, marketing part. You only have like one or two full-time people in that stack I just built. And then you guys just have to be okay with being lonely. Like so many people just hire because they feel lonely and they feel like business is hard, but that's just business. Like building a bunch of people on your payroll for no reason. Now you're lonely and can't pay your bills.
I will say this though, the more people you have in your office, the more sidetracked you get just bullshitting about stupid stuff, right? Like, our office is pretty quiet here most days now, which is kind of the way I like it because that means I get stuff done, right? Yep. Whereas when we'd have a full office, back in Oregon, it was like, how much did we actually accomplish today? Because Chris always wanted to bullshit. Yep. Dan was never a big talker, but Chris would always be in his ear anyway. And, if I was there, he was always leaning in the door. Well, what about this? Oh, hey, how's the weather today? Oh, whatever. I think that's a big component. People have to be okay kind of working by themselves some of the time, but that's a real estate business, right? Like it's just what it is. It's how it's built, but that's also what makes it great because you can run it lean, have the necessary people, but not be overstaffed and kind of have the enjoyment of not having all these people problems that you have to manage every day just to keep yourself from being lonely.
Yeah. And I think the lonely piece is an important topic. Our company's remote. Like we have now our overseas team is almost 200 people. Our stateside team is 12 or 15 now. And again, we hire only who we need to. Like we're not hiring just to hire. And we still get together once a quarter just because the reality is like remote work, I think it's actually a benefit because if someone can manage their own time and work remote and be effective, they're probably a pretty good person to have on the team. If you have to feel like you have to babysit someone and they have to come into the office, you have to pat them on the back every single day, they can still perform great. But a lot of times to your point, like when I come into my office, I put these things on and no one can bother me. And I just knock out as much work as I need to get done. But yeah, I mean, I think if you guys are running small teams and you are feeling lonely, go join a mastermind that meets every other month or once a quarter. Like there is ways to feel like you have community and people to chat with about your business that are not just hiring to hire. And the way to my equation to know if you need to hire is I call it LCO, but start at the top, lead conversion operation. Start at the top with leads. Do you have enough leads? If not, don't even think about hiring. If you're overwhelmed with leads, then think about conversion. But a lot of you guys, you could just solve that problem with just getting better at sales yourself. So to me, bringing anything new into your organization should always be the last thing that you do. You should look internally first and try to solve that with the people you already have or yourself, because you're in it to make money. And like we talked about on the podcast before, the guys that I meet now that I go, okay, you have it figured out, are the guys that are 15 years into the business and have hired the big teams and spent millions of dollars in marketing. Go, you know what? I figured out a way where I'm going to make $2 million a year with 3 people on my team, and I only have to do 7 deals this year. And I'm in my flip flops every year. It kind of sounds like I'm describing Tucker, right? But there's a lot of guys like that I've met that they look at you, and I met plenty of them when I'm like, when I went to the Maui Mastermind, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing 1 million deals a year. They just look at me and they kind of smirk. They go, congratulations, but they kind of laugh because they're like, eventually you'll get to where I am. And a lot of the reason we're making the show is so you guys don't have to go through that 3 to 5 year period, which you still probably will. That's kind of the way it works of like, holy crap, let me build the coolest, biggest revenue generating people machine. And just to realize that it doesn't do anything but raise your blood pressure.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a growth process too though, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it's necessary to a certain extent just to kind of, have a good entrepreneurial journey and kind of understand these things. Because it's one thing to be told like we're telling them right now. It's another thing to experience it. And then once you experience it, you think back when you listen to a show like this and you're like, you know what? They were right. I was kind of fighting it at that time. But sometimes you just have to do that, right? But again, the beauty of this business is that there are only certain positions you absolutely need, right? Beyond that, it's kind of fluff, or ego or whatever. And that's what makes it a great business too, because you can generate a lot of money every year if you're good at this with not that many support people, kind of helping the business along. And there just aren't very many businesses where you can do that, especially with the freedom that you get with real estate.
Well, final word on my side for this show today, guys. There's a very boring, I'm not a big reader or podcast listener. Like I really, if we have a problem in our business, I'll go try to learn to solve it, but I don't just sit there and I call it mental masturbation. I don't mentally masturbate to podcasts and books and stuff very often. But what I will say, there's one book that I built most of our kind of onboarding and training around, which is called The Manager's Handbook. It's by David Dotson. It's the most boring read you ever read, but it's very tactical on if you do go hire, how to not do what Tucker is talking about, how to not abdicate, how to actually delegate the right way and have a team of high performers. So that's the last thing I want to hit on. Tucker, anything you want to hit on before we wrap up on the topic of team and overall organization?
No, other than just, know what kind of business you want to build at the moment, right? And then, build I would suggest, limited team around that to start with. And so as long as you kind of keep those two things in mind, you can always grow along the way and add people and change, what it is that the business does exactly. But, just kind of think about it. Don't just hire, right? Like it's easier to hire people than it is to fire people. So when you have to fire people, it's not a very fun conversation, especially when you're a younger entrepreneur. It's probably, it ruins your week, right? So, hire slow and just make sure it's the right person for the right position. And you absolutely need that position.
Love it. Cool. Well, as we sign off, you guys, thank you for sticking around for another show. One thing I'll call out is we built solutions. If you've watched some shows, Tucker and I don't hard sell you during the show. We try to provide much value as possible, but we've built some solutions to take care of a lot of the stuff alongside you guys. At Easy Button Investor, we obviously have Easy Button Leads where we take care of the marketing piece for you. We have our community where you can kind of get out of that loneliness if you're feeling it and get around people who are crushing it and kind of see what they're doing. And we also obviously have our kind of our Easy Button Investor platform that we've released this year where you guys can build your business on our platform and get everything you need to do that. So if you do want to reach out, the link is below the show notes for any of those things. You need help at all, just let us know. If you have suggestions, feedback, or ideas for the podcast, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, other places, and reach out. Other than that, you guys, as I always say, wherever you listen to podcasts, we exist, and we grow by you telling your friends about the show. So we appreciate it if you do so. And until next time, you're only one deal away.